Start with the fourth lead-up conference on urban development, technological solutions, and governance challenges. Good morning once again, and welcome to the city of Ahemdabad for the conference on urban development. We would now like to start with the inaugural session with the welcome remarks from Ms. Bhagyesh Soniji. Please welcome her on stage. Mr. Kenichi Yokoyama, Country Director, Indian Resident Mission, Asian Development Bank. Professor O.P. Mathur, Senior Fellow and Head Urban Studies at the Institute of Social Sciences, New Delhi. Dr. Kumar V. Pratap, Joint Secretary, Infrastructure, Policy and Finance, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Mr. Mukesh Puri, Principal Secretary, Department of Urban Development and Urban Housing, Government of Gujarat. Dr. K. Fang, Manager, Investment Operations, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. Mr. Bharat Patel, Co-Chairman, Associate Western Council, and the chair for the session, Professor Amitabh Kundu, Distinguished Fellow for the RIS. Please welcome everyone on stage with a warm round of applause.
Conferences that will lead up to the third annual meeting of Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, and that annual meeting is scheduled in Mumbai, end of June, which will be attended by the Honorable Finance Minister, Honorable Prime Minister, along with a large number of finance ministers from different countries of the world. The conference is being organized by ASSOCHAM and Research and Information System for Developing Countries in Delhi under the overall sponsorship of the Ministry of Finance. The theme of the conference, is urban development, technological. It's not only technological, the institutional aspects also, which are partly covered in governance, technological solutions, and governance challenges. Friends, I must tell you, we couldn't have chosen a better city than Ahemdabad, which has a long history of urban planning. The city has both the imprints of the Gujarat Sultanate to the Mughal Empire, the British Company to British Empire, and most importantly, it is also the stamp of Mahatma Gandhi. I must say, during my stay here, I fondly remember many of the memorial things which are associated with Gandhi. I hope the participants have some time, those who are coming from outside, to spend time there. However, for the modern urbanists, entrepreneurs, and investors, Ahemdabad is also associated with many other things. Major urban reform. It was the first city in the country which issued bonds not supported by the government of rupees 1,000 million. Also, you are all aware, the city is associated with recently the riverfront development, which has opened up possibilities of investment and business. But it's also opened up controversies with regard to environmental issues, and I'm sure these can be discussed to some extent when we're talking about sustainability and inclusiveness. I must say that although issues of Ahemdabad and Gujarat will certainly figure in the discussion, the conference is focused specifically on the national issues and also the international issues. I'm sure there will be issues of infrastructural investment, inclusivity, which are relevant for the state and the country and the other developing countries of the world to be figuring up, because we are very much looking forward to picking up these issues. Whatever you are saying, you'll be mentioning, discussing here, the conclusions that emerge will be not only recorded for bringing out in a volume, these are going to be taken in the Bombay conference for consideration in the annual meeting of Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. I welcome all of you to this conference. We are very much looking forward to the exciting discussion, which will be useful. It's being attended by academics, some civil society persons, the private investors, and government departments, senior officials who are on the demand side, and on the supply side, we have the financial institutions attending with full prominence. I would like to give my welcome remarks, and somehow you know the traffic situation in the city. We haven't yet got Mr. Soneji. So would you like to, on behalf of ASSOCHAM, say a few words of welcome to the participants?
Thank you, Ahemdabad. As such, he has already mentioned most of these things about this conference, and I'm so glad that on this occasion, such an important aspect is happening here in Ahemdabad. And as he rightly mentioned, Ahemdabad being one of those prime movers as far as infrastructure is concerned, and that too with a co-participation, just not looking at the government to do the things, but as an individual or the companies coming forward to do so. I welcome all the guests on behalf of ASSOCHAM, the RIS, which is and the Ministry of Finance. ASSOCHAM is the organizing partner here, and this is going to lead and generate a lot of inputs, not only for the government, but even for the entire policy making, which is going to be useful for the entire country. I once again welcome all the delegates, and I also welcome all the guests here. And we have very interesting sessions, the panel discussions, all around the 2 days. So I would want each one of you to take the fullest of time for this and have a great deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you. Bharatbhai Patel is the co-chairperson of ASSOCHAM Western Council. I'm very happy that you could step in, and we are all feeling very welcomed by your remarks. Since time management is going to be my primary responsibility here, because we don't have much time for the inaugural session, and generally the inaugural session doesn't end up with a discussion and question and answer, but nonetheless, you can reserve your questions. I've requested all the panelists now in the inaugural session to keep the questions, and most importantly, the lead presentation which will be made, which raises the macro level issues in the context of infrastructural financing, basically in India, but also relating with the problems and possibilities in other countries, by Professor O. Mathur. May I request Mr. Keiichi Yokoyama, who is the country director, Indian Resident Mission, Asian Development Bank, to speak, to give the inaugural address. I must tell you that I approached him because of some logistic confusion at a very last moment, and he was very kind to agree to deliver this inaugural address. I can only say, domo arigato gozaimasu. Thank you very much. Please take your seat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Professor Amitabh Kant, and distinguished representatives in the dais, including Joint Secretary Mr. Pratap, and Principal Secretary, Urban Department, Gujarat, and experts in the floor, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of AIIB, I'd like to thank this opportunity to talk regarding the, under the title of opportunities, urban development opportunities and challenges. I like to speak from the perspective of AIIB's experience working in India together with the state and central government, and what challenges we are together facing, and how we are dealing with the challenges. Oh, okay, thank you. So I have 6 topics. One is infrastructure financing gap in Asia and India. And a second is factors constraining urban investment in India. Third is measures to address those challenges and prospects. And we are here in Gujarat, and a few points about what we are really fascinated as an exemplary practice in Gujarat, and then AIIB engagement in urban infrastructure development, and concluding remarks. So first topic is just looking at the infrastructure requirement in Asia and India, particularly in urban infrastructure. So AIIB did a study last year, Asian infrastructure development requirement, and estimate is in the next 20 years, Asia at large requires $1.5 billion per annum on the baseline. And if you take into account the climate change impacts, the amount is $1.7 trillion, whereas the existing investment is about $0.9 trillion. So the existing investment level needs to almost double. And within Asia, India also requires about $200 billion per year of infrastructure investment on the baseline. And this is the Indian picture, and recent economic survey also acknowledged that India needs about $180 billion of investment per year up to 2040. And looking at the sectoral status, what I would like to say here is compared with the short-term needs and the actual investment across various sectors, urban infrastructure is the sector where there is a biggest investment gap. Needs and gap is the biggest. And recently, I think Ministry of Urban Development, Housing and Urban Affairs, Minister Puri mentioned that annually India requires 3 lakh crore of investment, whereas the actual amount per year is less than about probably 20–30%. So this gap still needs to be a huge challenge, and we fully agree that for India to grow annually 8% or double-digit investments in urban infrastructure is really a critical key. Despite that, we also acknowledge that thanks to the efforts, great efforts by the central and state governments, the annual urban infrastructure investment is growing rapidly, like smart cities, Amrut, Swachh Bharat, housing for all, and particularly housing for all is a very ambitious increase nowadays. So then next is then what is the factors constraining urban investments? And we need to start to say that urban infrastructure investment is the very complex and challenging infrastructure sector compared with other sectors. So naturally, it's a challenging sector covering various sector agendas like water, waste, transport, and energy. Whereas works need to be done in the congested areas, requiring a lot of stakeholder consultation, interagency coordination. So that's basic facts to start with. And then at the state and municipal levels, then the issue on, despite the huge funding requirement, the fiscal space issue of particularly the advanced states, whereas the low-income states more facing the implementation of absorptive capacity challenges. And on the other hand, due to the complexity of the urban infrastructure, there's a tendency on lack of ready investment proposals. So gestation period is also quite long. And India being still a lower part of the middle income country, the affordability still remains a challenge. So the bankability of PPP is attracting private investments also faces challenge. So then the complexity of proper implementation, management, weak institution, those are also additional challenges. And at the local body level, the empowerment issue, capacity issue, and also the dependency on the central state grant, lack of resource mobilization, and constraint in PPP. So in general, there's a so-called vicious circle. Urban infrastructure is underinvested, and then that leads to poor, insufficient service quality, and then leading to lack of revenue, then mutually reinforcing with each other. So then what are the measures that are being pursued and by the government and where agencies like World Bank, AIIB, other bilateral, multilateral donors are supporting? I think rather than just starting points, but I just mentioned that there are sufficient sound basis to address all these complex challenges. So existing and emerging policy and strategy provides essential basis. So we know that there's a report in 2011 by the high-powered committee under the Urban Development Ministry, and also ministry has issued a municipality reform roadmap for under the AMRUT, 11 points, 2015 to 17, and there was also an urban development strategy, and reportedly the ministry is now preparing a comprehensive national urban policy. So these all provide a very good framework, and I think the real challenge is to how to implement those bases in a fast way. And one particular area that we feel that we note that some policy decision maker like Niti Aayog CEO, Mr. Amitabh Kant, and urban minister is emphasizing nowadays is the need for the long-term urban planning. And what is happening in many cities in India still is really kind of haphazard and ribbon development. And it's a kind of horizontal spread of expansion of urban areas. So what this means is area widening, and this leads to costlier infrastructure cost for providing services. Services become inefficient, and land revenue becomes per unit land revenue is lower, and this requires private vehicle-based transport and inefficient public transport. So this is the underlying reasons of leading this vicious circle. Whereas the desirable way also practiced in China, Japan, many developed countries is more on systematic, strategic, controlled urban development along the transport corridors and industrial clusters. And this promotes more planned urban land use and then promotes vertical as opposed to horizontal development of urban areas. This can make the cost of urban infrastructure more efficient, service delivery more efficient, and land revenue per unit area becomes much higher, and also provides opportunities for planners to capture land value and use it for the future investments. And then efficient public transport. So this virtuous circle can be transformed to a vicious circle can be transformed to a virtuous circle. So with this approach, this can also be utilized to strengthen planning and implementation and resource mobilization. Long-term planning can also be used for developing a shelf of DPRs and empowering ULBs and building capacities and deploying personnel in the right places. And there's also a good opportunity for land use planning to link with the resource mobilization. And there's a good opportunity for doing property tax reforms and municipal bond issuance and land-based revenue strengthening. And also, there's also increasing amount of central grants like smart cities, and also a lot of scope for doing PPP, attracting private investments. So those are some of the areas action areas that we are trying to support the central state government and municipalities. So some examples how the local resource mobilization and land use planning can be undertaken is this is from China. So they initially started with very small municipal bond issuance, but now thanks to the asset value increase and infrastructure investments, the percentage of the municipal bond revenue against the municipal GDP is amounting to 8%. And just let me point out that in India, the municipal resource mobilization is just about 0.5%, plus 0.5% of GDP coming from central state grant. So whereas the peer countries, South Africa, Brazil, still can already achieving 5%. So if India can really mobilize the municipal resources, this can, of course, a lot of them has to be used for the recurrent cost, but urban infrastructure investment gap can be substantially bridged. This is an example of land value capture from Japan. In Japan, there's a railway in suburban areas run by private companies. And what they do is to expand the new railway network and doing a kind of land pooling and doing the real estate development. And this becomes a real cost recovery source. And I think in India, this practice is already also being pursued in several places, particularly Gujarat. So advanced examples from Gujarat, we note that Gujarat has excellent instruments already established, such as the planning instruments. Understand that Gujarat Town Planning Urban Development Act provides an essential framework and a legal framework for land pooling. And so these measures like heritage conservation and urban development SPVs have been established. And we have a shining example like Gift City, where very modern urban planning and investment attracting private investors are taking place. And this is an example from land appropriation provision Gujarat TPUD Act, this Land Pooling Act, providing a legal framework of pooled land, how the pooled land can be allocated. And these are some of the existing data up to 2010. Already 153 square kilometers have been taken up, and land reallocation has been taking place. So I think this conference has ample opportunities to learn from Gujarat's excellent examples and how this approach can be also widely replicated in other parts of India. So last part is ADB engagement in urban infrastructure development. And we have so far across India started operation since 1986, and $39 billion have been committed. And the present ongoing project amounts to $13 billion, out of which 20% is urban, but new country strategy started last year, pretty much focuses on urban, and we intend to increase our focus as urban development as a key for India's accelerated inclusive growth. And this is a kind of a map across India. We are active in 19 states at the moment, and also under discussion. There's no project in Gujarat, but one project I think we are very much keen to work in Gujarat. And some success examples are based on longer term partnership, Karnataka and Rajasthan. Primarily still our focus is on basic water supply, sanitation, solid waste, so those are basic infrastructure. But not only provide, along with providing finance, we have a kind of value addition elements like standardizing 24 hours, 7-day water supply and non-revenue water level from 45% level to 10% or even below is something that our service standard norm. And also practicing a sustainable water management through modern SCADA-based operation, and also cost recovery through tariff where possible. And new approach, so as I said, most of the still the demand for and the needs for the conventional standalone water investments is huge, but also we have been starting to, and also other development partners have also started to the new approach of more strategic urban planning linked with industrial corridor planning. And ADB has been working in the East Coast Economic Corridor development, doing integrated infrastructure planning, including urban industrial clusters, and linked to the spine network infrastructure. So Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, West Bengal, and we are also discussing this belt be extended further to the northeast. And this is also for the purpose of linking the industrial corridor to ASEAN and ASEAN plus countries through global value chain development. And just quickly run through what is the corridor development. There are 4 elements. The upper 2 is related to urban and industrial clusters, so it's the area planning. And then lower part is the trunk and spine infrastructure of energy transport, meaning railways and highways, as well as gateway infrastructure of ports. So these 4 elements, upper left is the road grid prioritizing strategic road investments, and then right hand upper side is the railway prioritized plan, and left hand side bottom is the port development plan, and then the right hand side bottom is the urban industrial land use planning based development, including infrastructure. So those are the new kind of, this is a new kind of infrastructure, urban infrastructure development, and infrastructure requirement in the Andhra Pradesh part of the Vizag-Chennai industrial corridor is almost 40 billion. So it's not only ADB financing, it's also a planning for other investors, development partners, and also state and central financing. And half of it is the urban industrial cluster development, and half is developing the network spine, energy, transport, and port infrastructure. So this planning process also can also do a financial planning over the shorter term, medium term, longer term. Shorter term, upper part is more urban industrial, lower part half is the network infrastructure part. So this, as graph shows, the investment initially has to start with a lot of public financing, multilateral development partner like AIIB, AIIB financing, and so on. But gradually, we can envisage that the medium term, our role is reduced, and AIIB and donors' role can be more on leveraged financing through more on intermediary, financial intermediary, rather than directly financing state government and central government. So this is a direction, new direction that we are trying to work with. And conclusion, just recapping what I have just covered. So there's a significant investment gap in urban infrastructure in India in particular, but across South Asia nations. And addressing this gap will probably hold a key for India to move from 7.5% present level of growth to double-digit growth over the future. And secondly, fiscal capacity and resource mobilization constraints at state ULB level. But as I said, this situation varies state by state. So we have states like Telangana, which is more project proposals than what they can implement due to the fiscal constraint, meaning that they need to put more efforts on mobilizing private finance and PPP-based mechanisms. Whereas states like northeastern states still lacks implementation capacity, so there's ample space for fiscal side, but still implementation cannot catch up. This probably calls for development of a project development fund so that they can prepare a shelf of a large number of project proposals. And Gujarat has a number of exemplary urban initiatives that we can learn, and whole India can learn, and I hope this conference can learn today and tomorrow. And also then high requirements for basic urban infrastructure are still, but great opportunities exist for initiating or already initiated longer term urban planning, accelerating the speed and linking it to resource mobilization efforts, and also attracting a PPP modality and enhancing the implementation. So with the AIIB, we are glad to be associated with the urban infrastructure investment. As I said, we have about $2.3 billion of existing project, and also pipeline. The DA has posed us almost $3 billion of investment proposals, including Gujarat, and we are keen to work with other, particularly AIIB, in this challenging agenda, working together, and also other development partners, World Bank and bilateral donors like DFID, where opportunity exists, and of course under the guidance and request from the central government. So with this, thank you very much, and I hope that our presentation can be used as a kind of a background for today's and tomorrow's discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Yukon Wayama. You have given a very well-researched paper as your valedictory address. You have not only talked about the alternate sources of infrastructural financing, also corridor development, and given us some kind of a broad roadmap for future development. You've also identified, I'm thankful to you for that, some of the constraints and the challenges that are being met, that are being faced at the central level, state level, and also at the local level. I'm sure other panelists would be able to tell you what are the difficulties they are facing also with the financial institutions and how the sensitivities can perhaps be discussed here. I'm really grateful to you. We should welcome Ms. Bhagyesh Soneji for joining us. No, we understand, we anticipated there must be some traffic problem. She is the chairperson of ASSOCHAM Western Council. I'm sure we'd have a few words from her at the end. May I mention that for each thematic conference, we have identified a lead speaker, lead paper writer. We have identified that person on the basis of the work done nationally and also internationally. I must tell you, when we discussed at RIS with the Ministry of Finance, we thought that the paper would not perhaps give the government's viewpoint, but certainly it will discuss the governmental programs. And we thought that once the scholar is identified on the basis of the research work, there is no need for quote-unquote sanitization. So you will have views, point of views for discussion, so that there is really an open discussion of the key issues and key areas of concern in the conference. Professor O.P. Mathur, who is a very distinguished scholar in the area of urban development, work in various capacities, not exact in the government also for some time, but with the government in many capacities. We have identified him to write the lead paper, and we would certainly like him to bring out the key issues of concern instead of necessarily going at the whole paper, because that would take, I looked at it, extensive work has been done. Just focus on the key areas of concern that we need to discuss. May I welcome Professor O.P. Mathur. You know, his CV is there in the volume. I'm not reading it out. He is the senior fellow. Earlier at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, and now with the Institute of Social Sciences, New Delhi. Professor Mathur, time is yours, 20 to 25 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for inviting me to this conference and asking me to initiate discussion on the financing issues of urban infrastructure. I'm also very privileged to have on the dais this morning the key stakeholders. We have the Ministry of Finance, we have the AIIB, we have the AIIB, we have the ASSOCHAM, and we have the organizer, the RIS, Amitabh Kundu. Amitabh, when you asked me to do this paper, I asked myself one question. And that question was that urban infrastructure in India has historically been publicly provided, it has been publicly financed, and it has been publicly managed. And what new insights would I bring to this kind of a provision that we are all witness of for many, many, many decades? And what I did was that I started looking at the literature, the international literature. Thank you. And the international literature really took me to the World Bank site, to the site of the Asian Development Bank, agencies such as McKinsey, the Brookings. And what I found was very interesting. What I found was that there were amazingly large number of financing instruments that have come into use over the past 10 to 15 years for financing urban infrastructure. We have an amazingly large number of institutional arrangements that have also come into use in the planning and development of urban infrastructure. And we are also seeing new innovations, particularly coming from countries such as Brazil, such as China, and to some extent India as well, in matters relating to urban infrastructure. What was equally interesting was that despite the diversification of the instruments, despite the diversification in terms of the institutional arrangements, infrastructure deficits continue to be very, very large, something that our country director from the AIIB just now mentioned. And the question was, what really impedes investment in urban infrastructure? And my paper would try to address this. You would find a very strong similarity in what I'm going to say and what you just heard from the country director. Can't help it. We're probably dealing with the same subject. But then I would further flesh out some of the figures that he put up in his presentation. Can we keep on, please? Who's doing the, oh, please. Right. This is just the opening statement, and I've already made it. What I'll do is that I'll divide my presentation into 4 parts. Very briefly, the first 2, that is, what is so important about urban infrastructure that we need to know, and why is it important now? The second part would deal with the approach to urban infrastructure, something that was very detailed out by the country director of the AIIB. But I'll focus on part 3 and 4, which deals with what are the lessons that we have learned over several years of our engagement with the subject. And finally, are we seeing any light somewhere, or are we still moving on, or we would want to move on the same road that we have moved on for the past 20, 30, 40 years or so. This is the structure of the paper. It's important for several reasons. Very obvious, our urbanization process is on, recording 2.76% in the past decade. But now, even with the decline in the growth rate that we expect over the next 2-3 decades, going down to about 2.4, 2.5%, according to the UN system, we would still be adding 9 to 10 million people every year, possibly going up to 11 to 12 million people every year to our urban population base. Now, what is distinctive about this is what we saw in the previous decade, the population growth as a result of census towns, and why it is important for us is that those census towns have virtually no urban infrastructure. And that adds to the dimension when we're speaking of urban infrastructure, that becomes an additional dimension to look at. The second reason why it is more important now, once again, we keep talking about the strong linkages between urbanization and growth, and that I'm not sure whether they're getting stronger anymore, but they're certainly very important. But the fact is that if we are aiming at 9%, 10% growth rate, and we have our Ministry of Finance sitting here, then robust city-level infrastructure is absolutely critical. We just cannot achieve 9 to 10% growth rate if we have the kind of infrastructure in our cities that we have today. 2. Number 3, what we are also seeing the technological effects. You're beginning to see, just the other day I was reading a paper on solid waste management, and how solid waste management of the earlier years is now being replaced by new kind of solid waste coming out with hospitals, a very, very different kind of a waste, the hospital waste, the computer wastes, and so on. The different kinds of waste which would require us to look at the whole issue of urban infrastructure from a very, very different angle compared to what we have been looking at in the past. And the last one, which I'm surprised that it was not mentioned by our country director or by Amitabh, the whole business of new benchmarks coming into play, the Sustainable Development Goals, the climate change issues, the new urban agenda, and the emphasis that is being placed on urban resilience, the urban safety, the new ways of urban transportation systems. All these would begin to play a much more important role, both in the assessment of our requirements as well as in the financing options. Just 2 years or 2.5 years ago, I was in Japan, and the 3 words that I heard in Japan, I'm mentioning this partly because I lived in Japan for long years, and partly because our country directly comes from there. The 3 words were defining urban infrastructure. Number 1, reduce, reuse, and recycle. That's the way in which they were looking at urbanization, in urban infrastructure for the future years. Simply reduce consumption, reuse it, and recycle it. This is the new definition that they were using in many of the discussions in which I was involved in Japan. Let me go to the second part very, very quickly. It was very interesting when I looked at all the urban programs, not of just the present government, but also over the decades. What was interesting is that no matter what the program is, whether it was the IDST of the early 80s, integrated development of small and medium towns, or the JNNURM, or the smart cities, or AMRUT, all of them speak of augmentation of urban infrastructure. When you see them getting translated on the ground, all these programs speak of the same things. It is water supply, it is solid waste disposal, it is wastewater disposal, it is urban mobility, and this is just one simple chart that I have given to show that on the ground, all programs translate themselves into augmentation of urban infrastructure. If there are other issues such as governance, such as capacity building, there are more strategic options to be used for implementing these programs rather than being the core of the programs. So let's begin that this is really the focus of all programs, all urban programs in our country, not just now, but even the earlier years as well. There are 3 important things that we need to know in discussing it. One is that the whole traditional notion that urban infrastructure was natural monopolies, they have a low price elasticity of demand, they have externalities. All these arguments have weakened on account of what we now call the unbundling of services, which has allowed competition even in those services where we earlier considered competition was not possible. So the whole range, and that has really allowed the private sector to come in, and this is a kind of very important development that we have noticed coming into the sector where public provision, public financing, and public management was the dominant model. You will also find that the third point here, the new instruments which are coming into the market, we have access to debt financing, we have access to land leasing, we have monetization of public assets, we have land value capture, we have conversion of land rights into infrastructure assets, and now we have the Ola-Uber type of financing gaining prominence as a financing mechanism, a very, very significant movement, implication of which we are still to fully recognize. And the last one, accompanying these debt instruments are also the new arrangements, which include public-private partnerships that we are familiar with, but we are seeing the emergence of the joint ventures, we're seeing concessions for the private sector, we are seeing urban development fund of the type that we have in Tamil Nadu, we are seeing special purpose vehicles as a part of the smart cities, and we are also seeing philanthropies coming in, Melinda Gates, for instance, into health issues and so on and so forth. So amazing diversification we are seeing in terms of instruments as well as in terms of the finance, the institutional arrangements for infrastructure. Now, when we come to the approach, find that, earlier our notion was that urban development is a state subject, and constitutionally it is a state subject. But if you really see and scan through our 5-year plans of the yesteryears and the Niti Aayog 3-year plan, we are finding that it is no longer and I repeat the word no longer, a state responsibility, it has become a multi-level responsibility, with the central government playing a very leading role, very, very leading role, in fact, much larger role than the state government play in laying down urban development policies, and by that I really mean development of urban infrastructure. So the earlier notion that state government will do whatever it wishes to do, and local governments will play a leading part, that is no longer valid, and that maybe we don't say it openly, but the fact is that it is a multi-level responsibility, and we need to recognize this. And the role of the central government, as we see in the 3 points that I have put on the screen, are very important, that we see central government coming in with their centrally sponsored programs. Earlier, NURM was the ACA, not a centrally sponsored scheme, but laying down the vision, laying down the future directions, and also putting a lot of money, and I'll give some figures to the next slide. Second role that the central government is playing, which is extremely important, is coming out the strategic directions, essentially saying that we need to reform the sector, and that was certainly very dominant coming out under the JNNURM, now under UMBRAT, and also the Finance Commission, the 13th Finance Commission played an extremely important role, laying down a set of urban reforms whose purpose was, can we open up the sector in such ways that other stakeholders also begin to play an important role. And the third one, supplements, which are no less significant. We already have the amendment to the Income Tax Act, which provides for tax-free bonds. We have the SEBI guidelines now, which I do not know how many of in this room would know, but the SEBI guidelines not only lay down the listing of the debt securities, but far more important, using the word corporate municipal governance. And that is the reason why the SPVs have a legal status now under the Companies Act because of the security, because of the guidelines issued by SEBI, something that we were missing out earlier. The states do continue, but their role now is more in terms of laying down strategies for better implementation of the central government programs, but also equally, no less important, the master planning exercises, the detailing of the project documents, project proposals. That really is the role played by the state governments. Local governments are virtually the agencies for implementation of these programs, and they're very much central to urban infrastructure development. Here, I think this slide will tell you the amazing variety of things that have happened. The reform that have been done, we don't see the results of that very much, but they're extremely important. I can't read my own slide from here, but if you can read it from the changes that have come in the ways the property tax assessments are being done, in terms of the negotiated intergovernmental transfer systems to the more defined systems of transfer, the grant financing giving way to debt financing, the whole transfer, in all these changes that have come about over the past 10 years or so, which are extremely significant in the way the urban sector has been dealt with. But this is the strong slide. And if our country director will look at it, I've tried to it took me quite some time to find out what each one really spent. The central government investments are really about 37,000 crore, which includes urban development and urban infrastructure financing. In terms of GDP, it is just about 0.25%. The state government investments amount to 43,000 crore, and which are 0.28%. And local government, which also includes some of the grants from the state government, they amount to 1.07%. So this is all that we spent on urban development and urban infrastructure in the country. And just to recall the AIIB's 2017 report, the average for Asia happens to be 5.9% in urban infrastructure development. So this really shows what is the lag in investment in India for urban infrastructure compared to the average that Asia has, which really runs into 5.8, 5.9% of the Asia's GDP. So we are lagging behind. It is too little, too fragmented, and in the light of the two reports that, one report that he mentioned, the HPEC talks of 39.2 lakh crore of investment over a period of 20 years. The McKinsey says India requires $1.2 trillion to over the next 20 years to really reach out to some standards. Now, this is the scene as of today. Now, what are the lessons? And I think here it becomes extremely important. One is that the current levels of investment of roughly about 5. The figures that I gave did not include, because I don't have them, the private sector investments, number one. I don't have the international investments into those numbers. I do have the FDI numbers. The FDI is pretty large. But that's more on the real estate rather than urban infrastructure part. Compared to the Asian average of 5.7% is extremely, extremely low. The conclusion that I am drawing from there is financing as usual, or as we do now, is no longer going to produce the level of investment that India requires if India has to aim at or is aiming at 8% or 9% growth rate. That's the conclusion, one. Secondly, budget provisions are not anywhere proportionate to the importance that Niti Aayog gives to the urban sector. You read Niti Aayog, you read the economic survey, and the first sentence, this is urbanization will drive India's growth, urbanization is the future of the country, all those statements that we read. But proportionate to that one, the budgeting provisions of the figures that I mentioned on the previous page are extremely, extremely small. Two, it is not very clear, reading the various documents, whether there is additional fiscal space available, or we claim it on the ground that urbanization and growth linkages are very, very strong. We don't know. We have been discussing all these things, but the clarity with respect to whether there is additional fiscal space available among the various competing uses that our resources have to be used for, we just don't know. Fourthly, within this picture, there are a whole lot of untapped opportunities. And tapping those opportunities, in my view, is absolutely critical if we still aim at 7% or 8% or 9% growth rate. And last one is, urban infrastructure is as much an issue of private finance as of public finance. Private finance is not meant for neutralizing the inefficiencies of the public sector, nor is it a substitute for the public sector. If we use private finance as a substitute for public finance, then it's a zero-sum game. Very plainly, it's a zero-sum game. So any idea or any position or any proposition that comes up, because there is no fiscal space available with the government, and therefore the private sector should come in, it would be merely substituting one for the other, and there is no net addition to infrastructure investment. And I think this is something that we need to be discussing in our conference. And the last one is that, do we see any light somewhere? I mean, what are the options available? Fortunately, there are, but they're pretty hard, and there's something our country director did not venture into. We really can't, local government is really central. And empowering municipalities, in my view, is a necessary condition for accelerating investment in urban infrastructure. It is not an optional anymore. Now, when we say it is necessary condition, what do we mean? And first one is some sort of fiscal responsibility at the level of local government. Some type of fiscal responsibility. We have none. It's a soft budget. because the services that they deliver are such that they can't be avoided. They have to be given. If you don't have the money, state government would give them money to provide some water somewhere. At least they will collect some solid waste somewhere. So because it is a soft budget scenario, therefore we keep doing it very, very suboptimally. My position is that unless we bring in some kind of fiscal responsibility, just like what they have done in the amended Brazilian constitution, which says we will withhold grants to local governments if they do not behave in the sense that if they do not raise at least the minimum, we will withhold further grants to local governments. Now they have done it, and it's in practice. I'm not suggesting that we go the Brazilian way, because Brazilian way is really three-tier federation. We are still a two-tier federation. We know it. But some form of fiscal responsibility, I think it is time that we begin to consider that. One. Second, our credit rating system, and I sense all the rating agencies they keep coming to the Ministry of Finance all the time. It's important that we look at the compensatory grants that the municipalities receive. The word there is wrong, there is a typo mistake there. But all the compensatory grants, as well as the formula-driven grants, be used as own resources rather than part of the transfer or part of the grant system. That changes the portfolio, the financial portfolio of the local governments. Own resource is a very strong component in rating of the municipality. Right now, because it is so small, and it was talked about property tax systems don't function and so on and so forth, that's correct. But if we begin to bring in the own resource component, the compensatory grants that the municipalities receive today, plus all the formula-driven grants, that would change the fiscal portfolio of municipalities. That's number two. Number three, right now, escrowing is the only option as a collateral. That's what we have been using. Only 22 municipalities have gone to the market so far since the time when Keshav Verma in Ahemdabad issued really the 1997 Ahemdabad bond. Keshav did that. And he escrowed property taxation as well as grants as collaterals of the future streams, escrowing that one. But we have been doing that wrong, and investors are not very comfortable with the future streams, because future streams are future streams. They are very unstable. And unless we begin to look at the constitutional and legal framework whether municipal assets can be used as a collateral, we will not make much headway for using debt financing. Now, right now, we can't use a municipal asset cannot be used as a collateral. It's a sub-sovereign. There are those legal or constitutional limitations on municipal assets being used as a collateral. But I think it's time that the Ministry of Finance and other agencies begin to examine whether municipal assets can be used as a collateral. Three. Number four is the land-based instruments, and much has been talked about it over the past few years, and particularly our present minister has been talking about it a great deal, both the monetization, land value capture, land leasing, the tax increments, and so on and so forth. Now, all of these have so far been used in India in connection with the real estate development, not for water supply, not for solid waste management, not for wastewater disposal, not for urban roads, not for urban safety. So the connection between all the land-based revenues have been with the real estate market. Sure enough, real estate plus infrastructure, but if the water supply is deficient in the city and we say we monetize it, or we, as has been done in some of the Western countries, leasing out a water supply asset that you redo it and run it, those examples are not yet, at least I'm not aware of it, and I've looked at all the literature that is available in India. It's time that we begin to look at that one. And land, once again, land is one of those factors of production that all tiers of governments have very deep interest. Central government wants to tap out of it the capital gains tax. State government taps it through stamp duty and registration. And local government is left with property taxation, which being a direct tax has its own limitations. Now, and land is the only source which is a mobile source. And as per the Municipal Act, they have access to land, taxes on land and property. But their boundaries are limited to only property taxation rather than getting a share of stamp duties. In corporation, they do levy a surcharge, but not in all the municipalities, nor do they have any share in capital gains tax levied by the central government. But land is a very important, and I think it is time that we begin to examine whether land being an immobile source and fulfilling all the conditions that qualifies it to be a local tax, whether there was any possibility in which those resources can be brought in. And finally, the point with respect to risks, which are there, and the private sector's sort of diffidence about investment. Risk insurance is one of the instruments, and I think Sebastian is right here from AIIB. I think it would be very important for people like Sebastian to begin to look at whether risk insurance, because of the uncertainty with respect to tariff structures, whether that can be insulated in such a way that private sector gets reassured of safety of the investment that they put in. And finally, it is the establishment of the database. As a researcher, we find it extremely difficult to deal with a sector as important as urban infrastructure. There are so many players here, but when you begin to look at what is it that they invest and what augmentation of infrastructure takes place as a result of those investments, we draw a complete blank. There is no information what we add by way of infrastructure capacity on an annual basis, biannual basis, or a 5-year basis. We just make some wild guesses and make our judgment, make our perception on that basis. Amitabh, this is all that I wanted to share. I do not know whether it's adequate, but certainly we'll do better in that. This is work in progress. I'll revise my paper in the next 2 weeks, and that will be circulation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mathur, for this comprehensive and sharply focused presentation. I'm sure the issues will be taken up in the discussion, so I don't want to comment on them. May I now invite Dr. Kumar Pratap, whom I can say in a way has been my colleague also, because we have been working together to develop the programs for different conferences. He combines the best of the two worlds. He's an academic who is into administration. So I'm sure we'll have a view which is very balanced and which is very, very practical. He is the Joint Secretary responsible for infrastructure, policy and finance at the Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Dr. Pratap.
Good morning. I'd like to keep it short because we have to end by 11:30. I'd like to highlight some of the priorities of the Ministry of Finance as far as urban development is concerned. I'd like to start with some big numbers that have already been talked about. As you would know, India is the fastest growing large economy in the world. We have regained that status at the end of 2017 once again. Urban India contributes majorly to that growth. 1/3 of India lives in urban areas, contributes 2/3 of the GDP. So if India were to retain its position as the fastest growing large economy in the world, the contribution of the urban areas has to increase. Given the condition of our urban areas, status quo would mean that it could become the binding constraint to the growth of the Indian economy. So we need to do something. Because of the productivity potential of the urban areas, like elsewhere in India too, cities have been recognized as engines of growth. India is rapidly urbanizing. We saw in Professor Mathur's presentation, 10 to 12 million people are being added every year to the urban areas. And it is expected that by the year 2030, 40% of India's population, or 600 million people, will be living in urban areas and will contribute 75% to the national GDP. We also know that urban India has a large infrastructure deficit, and this is manifested in poor quality urban services to the population. The challenge is to provide minimum urban services to the rapidly growing urban population in India while the present population is being underserved. Augmenting urban infrastructure will cost a lot of money. We have seen some numbers. Urban local bodies' own revenues as a percent of GDP is less than 1% in India. And that means low accountability as far as expenditure is concerned. ULB's own revenues come from taxes, user fees, and domestic borrowing, while property taxes are the most important constituent of own revenues. There are problems of low coverage, low rates, low collection efficiency, and lack of indexation of property values, making it a non-buoyant source of revenue. The 13th Finance Commission, we have a huge data problem in urban areas that has been highlighted, and the 13th Finance Commission, which is many years ago, had estimated that we have been able to actualize only about 21% of property taxes. The Economic Survey 2016-17 says they did a survey for 2 Indian cities, Bangalore and Jaipur, and they found that these cities are collecting no more than 5 to 20% of their property tax potential. This implies that cities could increase their resources by 5 to 20-fold from property taxes alone. Urban local bodies have also been unable to levy adequate user charges for the services they deliver. And the cost recovery in the water sector, for example, is less than 20% on an average of even the O&M expenses, operation and maintenance costs. As a result, a vicious cycle of low quality services leading to low willingness to pay, adequate user charges leading to bad municipal services has developed. And the previous Housing and Urban Development Minister used to say, and the current Vice President of India used to say, that if you want world-class services, you need to pay world-class charges. And that is a problem, because what will happen to the poor? That is the holy cow. But it is the middle class like me, I don't know about you, who are the main hurdles of this. The poor anyway pay much more than us. If you graph the connectivity to piped water supply or to grid-based electricity, you would find that 18 to 90% of the higher income households are covered by this. They pay much less than what the poor pay by the bucket. For example, on an average, I pay less than 5 paise per bucket of water I use as a middle class person. The poor pays about 10 rupees per bucket. That's a myth that we, the middle class, have tried to engender as far as user charges are concerned. The needs are immense. We have heard that. $1.5 trillion over 20 years in urban India alone. The immense financial requirements calls for a paradigm change in how our cities are financed. From largely grant-based funded cities to a combination of assured grants and more commercial sources of finance. The central government has launched the Smart City Mission, the Amrut Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation, and the Swachh Bharat Mission as part of the holistic strategy of urban development. However, work in these missions is moving at a slow pace. It has been reported that only about 2% of the rupees 9943 crore released for the smart city mission has been utilized so far. Similarly, 24 water supply projects worth only about 9 crores have been completed so far under Amrut, while 494 contracts worth about 19,000 crores have been awarded. In these missions, a pride of place is being given to private participation in urban infrastructure through PPPs for making delivery of urban services more efficient at minimal fiscal cost. India is second in the developing world, both by the number of PPP projects as well as the associated investments as per the private participation in infrastructure database of the World Bank. However, of the 945 PPP projects and 347 billion of investments that have come into Indian PPPs, only 14 PPP projects are in water and sewerage, accounting for an investment of less than $1 billion. This signals huge untapped potential. We believe that PPPs can be used effectively for water and wastewater treatment, integrated solid waste management, multi-level parking, etc. Today's newspapers have it that Gujarat state government has asked the Ahemdabad Municipal Corporation to feed Sabarmati waterfront with the treated water from 5 sewage treatment plants, and we believe that PPPs may be effectively used for this purpose. A major deterrent to the entry of private firms in the urban sector in India is the commercial non-viability of many of these projects. In addition, there's poor capacity at the city level to enter into such contracts. However, there are examples like the Manila Water Company in Philippines, where poor cost recovery has been tackled on the back of improved services, and water charges have gone up by a factor of 5 since the company took over operations in 1997. On the issue of poor capacity at the city level to enter into such contracts, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs would be well advised to develop model transaction documents and not leave it to the cities to develop these documents. MCAs across infrastructure sectors, the ministry should be doing, which would provide risk return framework for the private sector to come in. Ministry of Finance is happy to help if needed. Another opportunity that has been talked about is value capture finance. This refers to government internalizing some of the externalities that urban infrastructure projects create. Appropriate value capture finance tools can be deployed to capture a part of the increment in value of private land and buildings that urban infrastructure projects create. Just look at the investment. Metro systems, 300 crores a kilometer. And when you have metro systems of the type of Delhi, this has huge revenue earning potential for the government in terms of value capture finance. This amount can be used to fund increased public investment, creating a virtuous cycle in which value is created, realized, and captured, and used again for public investment. Some VCF tools have already been used in India, like conversion charges, betterment charges, and impact fee. The need is to standardize the use of VCF tools so that they're used more extensively with all public infrastructure investments. One of the manifestations of low user charges is the low issuance of municipal bonds in India. The numbers we have cumulatively done since 1997, about 2,000 crores. The comparable number in the US is $4 trillion. $4 trillion, where this is the principal means of financing urban infrastructure. The encouraging fact is that many of our cities have been found investment grade. And Pune has already come out with Pune and Hyderabad, and more are likely to come. But if you have low cost recovery of less than 20% in terms of O&M charges, no matter how you structure the project, municipal bonds will not happen. Overall, I'd like to reiterate what is well known, that urban issues should be tackled in a holistic manner. We know that urban areas have a large infrastructure deficit, inadequate finances, and poor governance. These challenges are inextricably linked. While finances would be required for improving infrastructure, so very crucial for urban areas to play the dominant role in growth, unless a robust institutional structure and governance foundation is there, much of this extra investment will go waste. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pratap. It's great to listen to heart-to-heart talk from an official in the Ministry of Finance, bringing out some of the genuine inadequacies in planning, implementation, and also actual spending of the allocated funds. Generally, the Ministry of Finance is always associated with doing heartless mathematics, but I'm very happy that Dr. Pratap, you did talk about inclusivity, not just, the financial responsibility, but inclusivity and talking about poor. I remember I was chairing a committee on housing shortage, and we did mention about how poor can afford certain kind of a payment. And I know a professor of the university and a very senior official of the ministry said, Professor Kundu, why are you talking only about the poor? What about we, the middle class? That the tyranny of the middle class often prevails in the policy discussions, and we have brought it out very sharply. I'm very happy about that. I'm sure these issues will be taken up, and some of these inadequacies that you have pointed out in implementation and spending can be certainly addressed. We have Mr. Puri, Mr. Mukesh Puri. We have a lineup of academic administrators. I learned he's also in the academic profession, and I owe a special apology to him because I requested him to speak with a very short notice of less than 12 years. I'm so happy that you've accepted, and I'm sure we'll hear some of the experience of Gujarat linking up with the issues of infrastructure financing. Dr. Puri, 10 minutes?
Very good morning to all. Respected Chair, Professor Kundu, ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to be part of this conference, and especially so because it is being hosted in our state. I'm thankful to Mr. Yokohama. He had some kind words to say about town planning and some other practices being followed by the state of Gujarat. And surely, yes, we've been doing well over the years, and we are now coming out with a few other innovations which I'd like to share with the audience. Since the time is limited, I'd rather not go through whatever I thought I'd speak and react to some of the points, not necessarily in terms of kind of responding to each of the points which were mentioned, but share some of the experiences of the state. Of course, it's a given that considering the needs of the urban infrastructure, the deficit which has been there over the years and which continues to prevail, there is a huge shortfall of funds which have to be generated. Slight difference of opinion from my side is that it is not exactly that funds are not available. In fact, the governments at different level, be it the central government, the state government, or the ULBs, have been providing for a fairly large amount of resources. Just to give the example of Gujarat, in this year, the current financial year, 2018-19, as much as 12,000 crores has been earmarked only for the urban development department, right? And which means as a functional department, as a line department, this much has been provided. Additionally, let us say the health facilities being run by the health department, additional funds would be coming. Many of the schools, most of the schools in the smaller municipalities are run by education department, so those money are not reflected in the budget earmarked for the urban development department. Or even the SPVs, the Sabarmati riverfront, it has cost us so far in all about 2,500 crores. So that is not reflected in the budget of the state government. All such projects, GIFT, etc., those SPVs, those are not reflected. So the quantum is not insubstantial. Similarly, the city we are sitting in, Ahmedabad, has its own budget of 5,500 crores. Surat, which is the second biggest, 3,500 to 4,000 crores. So while this money per capita may not be all that huge, it is not very small also. In fact, I would say, in fact, the theme for the session is technological solution and governance challenge. And since I'm representing as Principal Secretary of the Urban Development Department, the government in some way, I would rather focus on the governance challenge part of it, which is the more difficult part, I think. You see, what we are seeing right now is that there are two distinct categories. The bigger corporations, which are largely, we have 8 of those, Ahmedabad, Surat, and Rajkot, Jamnagar, and so on, Baroda, Junagadh, Bhavnagar. Those are reasonably well administered. They have their internal resources also. To cite one figure, property tax collection in the corporations in the last year, which just finished, last financial year on 31st March, is 90% plus. So recovery is not difficult. We have 162 municipalities with a population of 15,000 plus, and the highest category is 1 lakh plus population. The average is just about 50%. So see, the governance deficit is stark. Somehow the smaller municipalities, they just don't have the capacity not only to collect their resources, because after all, if Ahmedabad can have a collection efficiency of 97%, just outside the city, Bhopal, Saran, which are fairly prosperous areas, the number drops by at least 20%. And as you go further into hinterland, it comes to 40-45%. So you see, clearly it is the capacity of the system to recover the dues. It is not exactly that people are not willing to pay, because same set of people are migrating. In fact, many of them have house in Ahmedabad and continue to primarily reside in the smaller corporations. So that's another one. Second thing is, and the funds, additional sources of funds are there. Planning board provides funds, MP, MLA, 14th Finance Commission. So there are different streams of funds. Additionally, there are PPP projects. Let us say the ST Corporation has come out with beautiful bus stands. There are 2 of those in Ahmedabad if you'd like to see. Those have come in completely from PPP sources. A stadium has come up on a PPP model. So that, all those additional funds are extra other than what government has been providing. The other thing is the absorption capacity. You know, the smaller corporations are finding it very difficult to absorb the funds which are coming from Government of India, from Finance Commission, and from various other sources. Now, many of those funds are coming directly. And in the spirit of decentralization, that's the way it should be. However, the capacity is missing in terms of the technical expertise, even making DPRs, hiring consultants, doing the tender process right and in a transparent manner. So all those gaps are there. And therefore, the quality of life in a major city in Gujarat and a smaller city, except for a few notable exceptions like, let us say, Anand and so on, the smaller cities are in dire straits. And how do we correct that? The innovation that I was talking about, you know, if you, and all of us are aware of the administrative structure in India, the representative of the state is the collector and district magistrate, known by different designations in other parts of the country, deputy commissioner in some other states. In Gujarat, it is the collector, who's also the district magistrate. He largely, that office, he or she represents the state and kind of oversees the performance of all government departments. Clearly, if you have one office, one institution looking after maybe 100 odd committees as chairperson, it's almost impossible to focus on urban areas. And Gujarat is particularly important because 43% of the population was in urban areas in 2011. Now it must be close to 46, 47. And the process is only accelerating as it is expected to. And by some estimates, 70% of the GDP in the state is generated in the urban areas. So how do you resolve that? The government in 1960s came out with a model for rural development of the district panchayats, and to support the district panchayat as the executive head, district development officer, a fairly well-established model. Now the government has thought, in fact this was the initiative of our chief minister, only a few months back, there was a lot of kind of in-house discussion within the bureaucracy and within the political system, and now it has been decided that we should have regional municipality commissioners. You see, the institution of municipal commissioners supporting, leading the executive team in corporations has worked out well. Now what we have come out with is that there shall be a regional municipal commissioner, an IS officer who would have worked at least as a DDO for 2 years. As a DDO, meaning thereby somebody who has controlled up to or been in charge of more than 20,000 employees in a district, worked for 2 years, had the experience of handling funds to the tune of maybe 5,000 crores or more. And this gentleman is now made responsible for overseeing and monitoring the performance of, on an average, 30 municipalities. The institution has just been set up, 6 officers have been posted. Now we are going to kind of support, strengthen them, empower them, and delegate those powers. So that's one which I wanted to share with you. Second, there have been some talk in the earlier 2 presentations about unlocking the potential of the assets. And yes, town planning scheme is an extremely good example. How it has been done, Professor Mathur, you mentioned that probably it has been focused largely on the real estate sector, and it is those funds are not going for sanitation, water, and other such kind of basic infrastructure projects. I'd like to share with you, actually, we are using those funds for not only for drainage and sanitation, but also for road upgradation, and in a very large way for housing projects. Two examples, one from Ahemdabad and one from Surat, would probably help me in making my point. Now, Ahemdabad has a ring road. Those of us who stay in Ahemdabad would know Ahemdabad has a ring road, and which was built in the last decade or so over a traditional model of build, operate, transfer. So basically a toll was imposed, and that toll was good enough. The cost has already been recovered. A 76-kilometer road, 4-lane at most places, is functional and is doing well. Now, all along that road, town planning schemes have been built. So initially it was funded from a traditional PPP model. But now I happen to be chairman of ORDA in my present position. Therefore, I have an inside view as to what we are doing there. Close to 30 town planning schemes are being built. What do these town planning schemes give us? As Mr. Yokohama shared, ORDA in the last 10 years have managed to get 68% of the land is given back to the landowner on an average, 32% is used either for roads or for social infrastructure or for housing. More importantly, about 3 to 5% of it comes back to the Urban Development Authority for commercial sale. And that is enough to generate huge chunk of resources. ORDA today, as an Urban Development Authority, has a corpus of more than 1,000 crores. In this current year, 18-19, and I'm not talking about the corporation, ORDA is spending more than 250 crores on 6 bridges and under bridges on the ring road. So internal resources are enough, but that's not the point I'm making. Along this ring road, on one side, on the other side, not towards the city, a belt of 200 meters has been earmarked for housing projects. You know, affordable housing. And what has the government given to the promoter? The extra benefit is that as part of the affordable housing policy, extra FSI is provided. Of course, part of it is chargeable, not all of it is free. So that chargeable FSI brings additional resources, but still, since the FSI is available and there is certain relaxation in norms, which are all conforming to the General Development Control rules. Already, the Commissioner confirmed the numbers to me yesterday night. 85,000 houses are being built in that affordable zone. More than 20,000 have been completed, so building use permission has been given. So what we have seen is, by just tweak of the policy, 85,000 houses underway with a potential of 11 lakh houses on just one belt. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to the conference. We are joined by Secretary to Government of India, Mr. D.S. Mishra. I welcome him on behalf of Gujarat. So you see, this is one major unlocking of the resources. Now I talk about Surat. Surat, as of today, we have parts of ring road in that city. However, there is a stretch of 32 kilometers, which is still not linked, and which is in some spaces 2-lane, in some parts 4-lane, disjointed, couple of bridges to be made and so on. So we hired, of course, a consultant, and again there we have created a Surat Ring Road, a SPV. The SPV model works well, with Principal Secretary as the chairman. And there the cost, initial cost of constructing a 6-lane road for those 32 kilometers, which would ensure then the entire city would have the ring road, it comes to 1100 crores. Again, we are going for the TP scheme. In fact, in the last 2 years, as you are aware, Ahemdabad has given up, Ahemdabad Ring Road has given up charging toll on private vehicles. Now only on commercial vehicles it is charged. So then the Surat model had to be changed. Initially we thought that probably the toll model would work. But clearly, if we are not going to charge the passenger cars, the quantum of money which is going to flow is going to come down. So then we decided that we are going to encash the land and start with the town planning schemes. It's pretty much doable. The tenders will be out very soon, so that 1100 crores, at most 2 years, the road will be ready. And it doesn't stop there. Now, when you are making town planning schemes, it is not that you just appropriate that 40% of the land and make 12 or 14% of that, use 12 or 14% of that to make roads. What about the rest? And if housing societies are going to come up, if commercial areas are going to develop, people are going to expect those facilities. As per the estimate, more than 10,000 crores would require to be spent for drainage lines. Drainage, sewage will have to start now. It cannot wait till the societies come up. So that 10 to 12,000 crore also is to be internally generated, and the numbers show it will be done. Ahemdabad Ring Road gives us confidence. It is continuing to give us a revenue stream. So even the Surat Ring Road model is going to work. So my point is that, yes, there is a huge potential which can be encashed, and we have done it in few places. Municipal bonds, there has been some good talk. Yes, Ahemdabad was the pioneer, and we'll continue to take the lead. We are grateful to Government of India. Recently, you have come out with a policy wherein 13% of the funds so raised shall be paid upfront in the escrow account. Ahemdabad Corporation is ready with the proposal. We shall soon be sending it with the approval of the state government, and we hope to come out with municipal bonds. But to put it in context, what are we looking at? About 200 crores. This city has a budget of 5,500 crores. So yes, municipal, maybe as a signaling tool, they are important. They show our intent, capacity to repay. All that is fine. But at least as of today, the market, whether it has the absorption capacity, and well, if you look at many of the public sector corporations, and not only in Gujarat, let us say the electricity companies in other states, the road transport corporations, all of them have been routinely generating funds from municipal bonds, and their paying capacity is much, much lesser than that of the municipal corporations. Surely those of Gujarat and probably Maharashtra and many of the other developed states, they are generating municipal bonds and funds to the tune of hundreds of crore routinely, and there is a captive market out there. So probably a bigger thrust is required. These numbers of 100, 200 crores still sound very low. In fact, as part of the PF norms, all major corporations are supposed to invest a huge chunk, and often when we are sitting as part of those boards, it is very difficult to find the electricity boards or the transport companies or the other than, let us say, the power grid and other such companies. In fact, good bonds are not available in the market. I am exceeding my time, so probably I need to stop at this point. One last request I'd like to make to the lending organizations, AIIB and ADB and all other representatives if they are present. My point is we are talking about sustainability. In the concept notes circulated, there is a focus on sustainability. As part of sustainability, may I suggest whenever you are making a loan, and there is talk about loaning to the private sector, at least for those projects, reuse and recycling, which was talked about, should be made compulsory. Why is it that large projects which are funded by multilaterals come up and they depend on groundwater or on surface water, which is coming from the river and being transported at a heavy cost? They have a greater say, so they manage to kind of convince the local governments in the interest of employment, jobs, and so on. Why, if either desalination should be made compulsory if they are in the vicinity of coastal areas, at least 50% of their water use, and if they are within the hinterland, then they should necessarily be made to use recycled water. After all, our Supreme Court has passed a landmark judgment kind of enforcing that thermal power plants, if they are in vicinity of any urban agglomeration within 50 kilometers, they shall necessarily have to use recycled water. So if this is included as one of the conditions, it will give a boost, because many STPs are coming up. We are not finding industries very keen to pay even a reasonable price for that water. Water is available, but there is no buyer. So in the larger interest of sustainability, probably this is one condition which needs to be incorporated. Thank you, Professor Kundu, and I'm indeed grateful to the organizers, ASSOCHAM, for inviting me. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Puri, for center staging some of the great experiences of the Gujarat state into the mainstream of discussion in the conference. We know Gujarat is one of the high income states, recording very high rate of growth. Also, we heard that Asian Development Bank, as well as AIIB, has a project in this state. Although the great shine which was there on the Gujarat model is slightly down because of the social movements, but many of these success stories certainly need to be discussed at the national level, and I'm sure that this will be done. May I now request Dr. K. Fang. Dr. Fang, I put you in the last because we wanted to have the last word from you. It is for Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank that we are organizing this to take the key messages. We'd certainly like to, while waiting to hear from you. Dr. K.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. It's my great honor to be here to briefly introduce AIIB and also talk a bit about what we are doing in the urban sector. I look forward to hearing back from you during this 2 days conference about how we can work together with you to provide better support to urban development in Gujarat and other cities in India. Let me see.
You have right in front of you.
Yeah, it's
Right in front
okay. It's now moving. Okay. Yeah. As some of you may already know, AIIB is a newly established MDB initiated by China, India, and 55 other countries. It started operation just about 2 years ago. It's already now has expanded to 84 member countries, and it also got a AAA rating from the big 3 accounting firms. At the moment, the subscribed capital of the bank is $100 billion US, and 20% of them is paid-in capital. So we have quite a lot of cash in hand for us to invest. And the mission of AIIB is very much focused, essentially focused on investing in infrastructure and in Asia to promote sustainable and green growth in the region. We have 3 thematic priorities. Number 1 is sustainable infrastructure. Basically, we wanted to support green growth in our member countries. We would like to support those infrastructure such as green energy, solar, wind farms, and green transport, metro lines, etc., and sustainable cities. And second priority is cross-border connectivity. We wanted to help improve regional connectivity. So we are looking at those big infrastructure projects such as expressways, gas pipelines, big transmission lines, particularly linking different countries. And third priority is private capital mobilization. As earlier speakers already highlighted, public sector financing probably is not enough to meet the huge demand for infrastructure in the region, and really we need to mobilize more private capital. And AIIB wanted to play a catalyst role to help getting more private capital into the infrastructure. Our core operational principles or values are lean, clean, and green. Lean means we want to be very efficient. We want to have less bureaucratic process in our planning and decision making. And we also want to have a small number of highly productive team to support our member countries. Clean means we are zero tolerant to corruption. We have adopted very high standards on governance, on financial management, on procurement, on environment, social safeguards. But of course, we also want to avoid excessive conditions to be efficient as well. Green means we want to support those green growth, as the Secretary mentioned earlier. For example, recycling, reusing resources, etc., and particularly green infrastructure. We want to build up our institution as a green institution. We are focusing on project financing. We can provide sovereign-backed loans to government entities to support public sector investment. We can also provide a non-sovereign-backed financing to private sectors, to subnational government, for example, municipalities, or SOEs without a guarantee from military finance. We can provide a very long tenure for sovereign-backed financing up to 35 years. For non-sovereign-backed financing up to 20 years. We can also have a very flexible repayment scheme to have a long grace period to support infrastructure construction. During the grace period, the borrower doesn't have to pay back the principals, and they can focus on the construction work. We can also invest in equity. We have already approved a few equity projects. We can invest in the PE funds. We can invest in the companies and also funds. We can also provide guarantee with the sovereign-backed guarantee or without sovereign-backed to borrowers, for example, to cities to enhance their creditworthiness so that they can get a better financing support from the market. As the bank right now is very young, we're only 2 years old. We are partnering with other MDB, our big sisters, brothers, such as World Bank, ADB, EBRD, AIIB, IFC, etc., as well as bilateral development agencies, Korean development banks, AFDs, etc. We are also working with private partners, such as commercial bank, developers, equity funds, pension funds, etc. You can see AIIB, you can consider AIIB as a combination of the World Bank and IFC, because we do both public and private sector financing, and we can support the PPP, including those private initiated projects, as well as other type of investment. In India, we are also working with lots of NGOs and think tanks. In India, we already started working with the TERI and also the new organization, International Solar Alliance, initiated by India. This is our current portfolio. Our board has approved 25 projects in a total amount more than $4.3 billion in just last 2 years. And you can see the largest portfolio is in India. And of course, we also work in other more than 12 countries. Majority of the investment is in the energy sector, about almost half of the portfolio, about 27 in the transport sector, followed by 20-25% in the urban sector, and then others as well. In India, we have already approved 6 projects in total amount of more than $1.2 billion. One of the projects is in Gujarat. That's a Gujarat Rural Roads project, phase 1. We are going to start phase 2 soon. Other projects are in different states. You can see there is already investment in equity fund. That's the Morgan Stanley India Infrastructure Fund. I actually prepared a few examples about our project, our support in cities. Because we may not have enough time, I can leave those slides with you. And of course, I'm happy to discuss in more detail with you in the future, in these 2 days. So these are some examples, and you can see we are using different financing instruments to support infrastructure investment in cities. For 2018, we have set up targets to increase our investment to up to 2.5 or 3.5 billion US dollars, including more in the urban sector. As we are developing, we are learning by doing. On one side, we are already started doing urban investment. On the other side, we are developing our urban sector strategy. It's still under development, but we have kind of identified 3 dimensions or 3 directions. One is client-driven. We want to work more closely or directly with the cities because we have an advantage having these non-sovereign bank financing instruments. We could lend directly to cities without having going through the Ministry of Finance approval procedures, etc. But of course, it's still important to work with the national government because national governments, state governments still play a very major role in providing enabling environment and in many cases also funding to support the city development. We want to also focus on outcome, delivery integrated solutions within the urban boundaries, really promote sustainable, highlighting sustainability. So we are looking at to support green, resilient, efficient, accessible, and also economically sustainable investments. Lastly, we also want to highlight the importance of financial viability. We really want to enhance the city's own capacity to attract more funding and also ensure those investments in the cities will be financially sustainable. So that's why we would like to work more closely with the municipal government as well as utility companies to help them develop a bankable and financial viable project. We are going to have our 3rd annual conference in Mumbai, in India, this year during summer. The registration process has started, and I was requested by our management to send an invitation to all of you here. There will be a very big event, including a half-day infrastructure investment forum, and one of the focus is on sustainable city development. I hope I can see many of you there again in Mumbai. That's end of my presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fang. I know you had to cut short your discussion, but I'm very happy that tomorrow also we'd have an opportunity of listening to you. And with the permission of Dr. Yokoyama and also Dr. Fang, we can circulate these PowerPoints to the participants. I don't think there is any time for the chairperson summing up, which is not needed, but certainly we cannot conclude unless we hear a few words from Ms. Soneji. What would you like to say?
On behalf of ASSOCHAM, our chairperson would like to present a memento to the dignitaries.
Excellent. Okay.
On behalf of ASSOCHAM Western Council, our chairperson, Ms. Bhagyesh Soneji, would like to present a memento to all the dignitaries on the dais. Madam, to present memento to Mr. Kenichi Yokoyama. Dr. Kumar V. Pratap. Mr. Mukesh Puri. Professor O.P. Mathur. And now I would request our co-chairman Bharat Bhai to also present a memento to Mr. Dr. K. Fang. And Professor Amitabh Kundu. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Namaskar all. Apologies, I came late. I was a victim of urban development, infrastructure development. Metro is under construction, and the car before me was wanting to go for tafri, not wanting to increase the speed. And I had to follow because we could not overtake, and I had, I reached here late. Thank you so very much, IRS and Ministry of Finance. Dignitaries on the dais, off the dais, friends from media, ladies and gentlemen. Urban development is nothing which could be talked in one generation. We always have to think about several generations where it could complete in many generations to come, and the best results should come out of it. When I came late, I was thinking I have become late, but now I'm thanking myself that I have come late so I can highlight some missing points of Gujarat and some missing points of infrastructure development which we can think about. DMIC is the project, you know, the freight corridor, and when DMIC agreement was signed, Gujarat government wanted to prepare for that. It is a straight freight corridor, and Gujarat government made 9 horizontal highways. Mukesh Puri ji is here, he will be giving 9 for one vertical freight corridor, 9 horizontal state highways. Because Gujarat government wanted that this DMIC project should be influencing maximum part of Gujarat. And 3 ring roads in Ahemdabad have come up, 3 ring roads. And that's how 62% of Gujarat population will be influenced by DMIC with some state government's preparation. We were first to be ready with SIR Act too. When Dr. Mathur said about reduce, reuse, and recycle, we must know today that in our countries, today also, only 35% of electronic waste is recycled. Only 35%. 65% is still lying, which could be the biggest challenge in future. That infrastructural development, those kind of challenges, we have to be prepared, or we will have a place like Bangalore, foam on the lake. And the first urban city in the world, which is Cape Town, which is already collapsing. We should be prepared for, sometimes we, as an entrepreneur and as a citizen, I feel like this is the right time that we are quasi-developed. We are not fully developed. And this is the right time we have an opportunity for infrastructural development where we can take care of these challenges which other urban cities which could not take care before 30 years. Another thing is, we could have, as I was just Googling, and we have most of the cities below, we have 40 cities, like if you leave Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Pune, and Ahemdabad, our cities are what, 20 lakhs, 28 lakhs, and 10 lakhs. Most of the cities we have are Jabalpur, if you go 10 lakhs, it is 30th city. Most of the cities having 10 lakhs, how could we plan revenues? How we could plan the budget of municipal corporation? So are we going to remain the quasi-urban developed country? The biggest challenging part would be, today the fashion is no farmer's son is wanting to become a farmer. Because we have a tradition. I have 4 sons. One is a peon here, another is driver here, third is a clerk somewhere, fourth is not doing anything, going to farm. So migration could be the biggest challenge. And where will they migrate? They will not migrate to the cities which are of 10 lakhs and 12 lakhs. They will migrate to bigger cities. What about the supplies? What about the established urban development there? Can they face those challenges? We have to be prepared. As experts are here, I am buying this opportunity to highlight these reasons. Another good thing is urban. Why can't we take urban facilities to the rural areas? GIFT City is admired. What is GIFT City? People sitting from Gujarat here, they know GIFT City is established in the rural area, and another 60 to 70 years, it could be highly mechanical, developed urban area. So we have to develop few new cities where there are chances of migration, but with newer ways of urban development. I'll not take more time. These were a few points which I wanted to highlight because we are already late by 45 minutes. So time to thank. We thank Professor Amitabh Kundu, the distinguished fellow from RIS, who took time to come here and presenting very nicely and chairing very nicely. We would also like to thank Mr. Kenichi Yokohama, the Country Director, Indian Resident Mission, Asian Development Bank, the bank which has to perform the biggest task in future for everyone talked about funds, and you people are responsible for that to provide funding in smart ways. We would also thank the lead presentation maker, Professor O.P. Mathur, the Senior Fellow and Head Urban Studies at the Institute of Social Sciences, New Delhi. We thank Dr. Kumar V. Pratap, Joint Secretary, who made a short, very logical and concrete points, the Joint Secretary Policy and Finance, Ministry of Finance, Government of India, the same way, like bank. This department also is very important. We also would like to thank Mr. Mukesh Puri, Principal Secretary, Department of Urban Development and Urban Housing, Government of Gujarat. I was just admiring that the IAS officers in Gujarat, I generally find, because I am born and brought up eastern part of the world, I'm here. IAS officer in Gujarat, they are really dynamic. We are demanding being Gujaratis. We don't ask them for jobs and all. We ask them for development. We ask them for infrastructure. And we argue with them. We discuss with them. And somehow the tradition and mentality is that they answer us. And we are always, thank you so very much. Dr. Ku Fang, Manager Investment Operation, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, another like lot of financial representation he's here, which is a very good point in this. And this program, we wish a very good success. I must not forget to thank every member, every individual present here. I'm sure that when you will leave this hall, you will be enriched with some knowledge about infrastructure development, and we'll have brainstorming session, which will bring good things to our nation. Many, many thanks to the friends from media who are present here and who are always cordial with me and SHM. Thank you so very much, guys. Thank you again. Namaskar.
Thank you, ma'am. With these beautiful words, we bring the inaugural session to a close. We are running 45 minutes behind schedule, so there is no time for chairperson summing up, which is not needed. But we are all keen to listen to Dr. Mishra and the panel. So please do not think that RIS and SHM has decided to combine tea and lunch. Please come back within 10-15 minutes so that we can start the next session. Thank you.